This morning we have, I mentioned both Adrian Piper, but also Joseph Beuys as kind of occupying the unresolved space of authority and the mythic being still speaking to us. And I also mentioned John Cage and Merce Cunningham and their sense of a common time. But one of the things I think that's really interesting to think of through today as we slow down a little bit and also talk about preservation, the notion of acquisition, but also holding a gesture. What does it mean to hold a gesture or occupy a gesture in particular ways? What's that durational sense of performance? I think we'll find there's some very different and very resonant points of address this morning and this afternoon. Because if you think of John Cage, his, I think, most important frame or landscape terrain is the terrain of duration. Duration is what he really charged so many people that he worked with. And within his work with Merce Cunningham, duration became a kind of central concern and something that gained new knowledge and gained new movement and gained new forms. And I bring that up because the conversation this morning with Maria Hassabi, Maria's work very much engages duration in a very particular way. And it's really an honor to have her here, and also to be Philip and I being able to collaborate with her. She was here for a site visit about 5 months ago, and it's also great to have her back in at the Walker and being able to see the spaces again, and to be here with Aram Moshayedi, who's coming from the Hammer Museum. They began the project Plastic at the Hammer, which traveled on to the Stedelijk and will actually then come to the Museum of Modern Art as a third venue. In seeing Maria's work at the Kitchen or the River to River Festival and many other places, including the Lithuanian Pavilion, which was unforgettable at the Venice Biennale, there's a sort of a anticipation that kind of resides in the viewer after having, for me anyway, after having seen Maria's work, an anticipation of the next encounter. So I want to thank Maria for being here, and I want to thank Aram for taking up the conversation with Maria. Aram joined the Hammer, I think, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and has been doing amazing projects in both Hammer projects and a number of exhibitions that are in the works. And we're happy to be collaborative partners, the Walker and the Hammer, on a number of upcoming projects. And he's also cooking up a very interesting biennial made in LA with Hamza Walker, an amazing curatorial colleague. And I think I'm really looking forward to seeing that. That opens in 2016. So with that, I'm going to invite Aram and Maria up to the stage and hand over the conversation to both of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was really nice. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.
Maria kind of had the idea that I should maybe say a few things about my first kind of encounter with the work, which was actually in Venice, admittedly, in person. And so I'm going to read a little bit of something, maybe kind of gets at some of the interests that I had initially that kind of led to Plastic, that was presented at the Hammer in January of this year for 1 month. So forgive me, but it's what I have to do. The performance-based works of the choreographer and artist Maria Hassabi are rooted in sculptural time, in the folds of exhibition time rather than stage time, as much as they negotiate the specific parameters of exhibition, display, and presentation in the murky area that sits between museum and theater contexts. Hassabi's works are equipped to reconcile the living and breathing temporality of sculpture with the forms of movement that are inherent to performance. To this end, the curator Raimundus Malasaukas has characterized them as, quote, living sculptures, akin to a volcano that moves slow, takes its time, and attempts to be still. This description of intermission a live installation developed and performed in Venice in the Lithuanian Cypriot Pavilion, 2013, plays on the metaphors of stillness, potentiality, and the slowness of geological time, which have been key aspects of Hassabi's work for more than a decade. Admittedly, Intermission was my first encounter with Hassabi and her work. Set in an ordinary Venetian gymnasium, Hassabi's durational choreography was performed during the exhibition's opening days by the artist and 2 other performers. In a cavernous space, framed by stadium seating and a basketball court, Intermission unfolded among and within other sculptural works. The performer's presence receded, however, almost like discrete objects or passive observers sharing in the alienating experience that I often have when visiting an exhibition. This is very important for me because I never know where the hell I am most of the time when I go into a show. And that was really the case there. As part of the tableau, an ominous soundtrack rang throughout, a composition by Morten Norber Halverson that evoked the body's innermost groaning. The performance seemed to move in unison with the slow pace of this resonant, droning sound. But when I entered the exhibition through one of the 2 possible means of ingress at the gymnasium's uppermost level, I saw Hassabi and her performers on the opposite side of the stadium seating and remember thinking that they appeared to just be hanging out casually on the steps of the bleachers. I definitely wasn't invited to hang out with them. I felt so out of place. It was hardly a performance in the spectacular sense. Their presence was everyday and fluid within a scenography that was apparently attempting to exploit the parameters of discrete art objects and their insistence on an otherwise pristine context of reflection and display. The spectacular nature of early performance art is a precedent from which more recent practices like Hassabi's have departed, insistent as they are on the temporally and spatially dislocated possibilities of dance and theater as integral links to exhibitionary logic. Through works like Intermission and by extension Plastic, Hassabi confronts exhibition time and the standard modes of operating that institutions within the visual arts have come to rely upon. So, Maria, given that, here's one image, here's another from Venice. Can you talk about what happened next?
Yeah, sure. So then Aram called me. And we began a conversation of how we could work together, develop a new work for the Hammer. So then I went to visit the Hammer. We did a site visit. You were already from the beginning asking if I would be interested to activate spaces in the museum that are not usually activated within your exhibitions, let's say. So we were not focused originally looking at gallery spaces, but really the liminal spaces. And right away I got attracted to staircases and the balconies, and in general just the spaces that people have to take before entering the gallery spaces to see the exhibitions. And then it became this, before I decided the space, we also agreed in using one gallery space because we thought that it would be helpful in a way to elevate the work, to have a space that is recognizable for the viewers, that they usually see works in a gallery space.
I'll just go to the so you can see.
Yeah. And of course, away from just thinking about how to make the work and all of that, it was a big question how to raise all the money, because we decided we were going to do a run for 1 month. You know, the museum is open 9 hours a day. We were going to be present there for all the whole duration, opening of the institution hours. And we started thinking of, okay, pulling in other institutions to collaborate with us. And for some reason, I thought applying for grants, which is usually what you do as a choreographer, it would not work here because it was not a theater, and it was in Los Angeles. And I thought that would be impossible.
Right. It's true.
I did apply for Jerome, and Eleanor Savage is here, and thank you so much for supporting the project. And that's how I ended up talking to MoMA, and thankfully they welcomed the proposal, and then to State League. And the three institutions we all started collaborating together. But the work was first really architecturally based on the Hammer Museum. And that's why I went specifically to MoMA afterwards, because it also has staircases, balconies, and all of that.
Right. Yeah, it'd be nice to talk about kind of also eventually how the work is, how you're conceiving of it differently in the second and then third iteration, which is to come. And then also specifically this, one of my questions is, why do you like stairs? But maybe before we do, should we look at maybe like this 6-minute video clip from the Hammer?
Okay, I think that's enough.
So that was actually just, 5 minutes of what the piece, its full kind of length is.
It's 4.5-hour loop.
Right. So.
Not a lot happened, no, a lot
Right.
happened actually.
Right. And it's interesting for me because what you do get a sense of is this kind of the reactions, I guess, of kind of the immediate bystanders or witnesses or kind of audience members. And I think Reinhardt famously said that sculpture is something you bump into when you look at a painting. And I think in this case, performance is something you trip over on your way to a sculpture. Mm-hmm. And there was some of that. And I wondered, maybe just because we just saw, some of those kind of reactions in an immediate sense, but can you tell us, because you're in such close proximity and you're there performing it, you kind of have access to this real-time critique or reception. And I wonder,
you listen to everything that people say, and it's really beautiful when people do stay and sit and stay with you for a while, but it's not the priority. People can do whatever they want. They can ignore us completely, they can kick us, and which they do.
Right. What were some of those things that happened? There were ridiculous things.
At the Hammer, the most amazing thing was that every day somebody said, call 911. Every day. It never failed.
Right.
At the State League was completely different.
Yeah. And it's all those impassioned Los Angelinos. Yeah.
Well, it was also, it's the first thing you see when you enter into the museum, is the staircases.
Right.
Then once you go upstairs, you realize, okay, this is a setup. This is a construction. It's not nobody's falling off the stairs, but.
Right. And it's interesting too. I think because of the way in which the piece at the Hammer kind of occupied these three sites, the gallery, the kind of landing, and then the staircase, that there would be these almost kinds of three different kinds of expectations. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that within the galleries, I remember going in and it was completely hushed. No one would ever say anything.
Yeah.
Because also just being kind of the intimacy of it, being kind of forced into this close proximity with the performer whose movements were equally as kind of slow and precise. Can you talk a little bit about, from my perspective, I think you had asked me about, the reason that the gallery kind of entered into the conversation, I think, was, again, a certain kind of practical curatorial decision. Because as much as I was interested in how the piece could kind of function in these, kind of discrete interstitial spaces, that mm-hmm. it would not have to kind of, be subjected, the work wouldn't have to be subjected to the same kind of degrees of mediation, and it could be kind of more happenstantial, that I felt within the museum, the gallery became an important place to kind of fix the project in a way. And that has everything to do with the way, the kind of central nature of exhibitions proper.
It almost gave us more respect from the audience.
Right.
Knowing that, this artist also has a gallery space. They were able to allow themselves to see the work with more respect. It's difficult, putting dancers on the floor. It's different in a stage. You expect that we can take over the whole stage, but using liminal space is almost like public spaces, and you're throwing these dancers on the floor. It's like, you look at them from above. I don't know.
Right.
And having the gallery did, uplift the project.
Huh. And in terms of that, I wondered also this question about, kind of choreography or planning the piece and just kind of developing and conceptualizing it in one place, and then kind of thinking about it in relationship to the specific kind of conditions of the Hammer, and how, obviously there's a kind of dialogue at play. We're thinking about the kind of the gallery as one mm-hmm. kind of context, and then in some ways by using these theater lighting, theater lights, that there's a certain kind of logic of another kind of context. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a part of the work. But I wondered about this translation from, the conceiving of the work and then having to think about it specifically relating to the space. How it changed maybe once you came to the Hammer, and you saw some of the kind of like specific conditions. And it's really important to point out also that, you know, some of those specific conditions changed as the progress, you know, kind of unfolded, because, you know, importantly, you know, it was installed during an installation that was taking place.
A huge installation.
A huge installation in the galleries. So in some ways this was, you know, had to contend with, just in terms of activity of the museum, because there was an installation going on, but then introduction of like elements like this red bust that was designed by Thomas Heatherwick, which accompanied the exhibition Provocations.
Yeah.
So yeah, can you?
It's almost like, I feel like within a museum, because you are alive, human being, you're not a sculpture, everybody felt really comfortable to asking us to move a little bit to the side so they can they can pass through the sculptures that they had to install in the gallery. And I would get really, really upset every day and send you text messages and all of that.
Yeah, no. And it's something that you know, and this is, again, like when in terms of the practicalities, if you're just working in the kind of safe space of the gallery.
That was like done.
You know, no issues.
Nobody bothered them.
No.
The light, one light burned, right away they took care of it. You know, everything was, they knew how to function within a gallery space. But, you know, in these other spaces.
Yeah.
But they did end up, you know, you remember when we finished, everybody gave us flowers, everything. Like all the people that worked there, because we gave them something to look at every day.
Right. But that intercommunication, you know, between the multiple departments, you know, I think was a really interesting thing to see, and how even, you know, the museum had to kind of negotiate your presence, and then you had to negotiate the museum's presence. And it was almost as if every day there was like a new challenge, because, you know, a museum functions with like, at the Hammer, it's like over 100 staff members, and it's like, maybe somebody didn't get the memo, you know? And it's just, you know, and something like a trash can being misplaced in the wrong spot, you know, or a bench, you know, and these things that we would have to just kind of immediately respond to. But, so that's one way it kind of shaped the work, but I just wondered more about, like, you know, even just, because you came kind of 2 weeks, I think, before to work with the dancers in the space.
From UCLA,
and how you kind of imagined the work, you know, when you were rehearsing in the studio, and then having to kind of translate that to the specifics of the Hammer, because I remember it would change. You know, at one point you had planned to go around the entire perimeter of the terrace, and then after being there for a bit of time, you know, you realized that maybe that wasn't the kind of best.
It was impossible. Well, I got like all the, how do you call the dimensions?
Floor plans.
Floor plan, thank you. And then made the choreography in my studio in New York, kind of imagining everything. Of course, I went there for a visit, so I took photographs of the spaces, but it's never the same unless you are in the space. So once at the space, I realized it was already, this part was 4.5 hours. If adding all the other things that I choreographed, it would have been like endless. So I ended up just cutting things.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I forgot to ask this thing, but when we were talking about this before, about this, like the kind of working in these, you know, marginal interstitial spaces, which you've done in the past as well, you know, how much are you willing also, and this is the question about how you adapted the piece once you were at the Hammer, but how much control are you willing to kind of like give, or kind of lose, sorry?
Well, I think the choreography is so detailed and precise amongst each person's solos, let's say, but also we have so many cues between us. And particularly for this work, everything that we do is written down on a piece of paper. It's many pages long, but we all count, we all, you know, it's the only way to stay, when it's such a long choreography, it's the only way as well to stay in sync with each other and know each other's places in space. So having such a strong, precise score, if something goes off, let's say if you fall off the stairs, I hope that never happens, but you know, the other person knows right away, in a way you know how to react and how to cover the other person. You will notice if one of the performers gets really upset and wants to stop, let's say, and we know how to cover each other. But we talked a lot about, okay, if somebody makes you really upset, like when people come and take photographs really close to you, and they do this to you, and they, you know. Of course, you're really angry, but I don't want us to act up, you know. I'm more interested in this moment of like maybe looking at them in the eyes, staying calm, maybe smiling at them, finding other ways to say, just get away from us right now.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of things that happen. Like I said, like somebody came to me and said to me, you need to go to therapy. And then she went to Christula, she went to Oishin, she went to Molly. She had to tell everybody that we had to go to therapy. And in the end, I mean, there's more to laugh at her than at us, you know, because she became more crazy than us.
Right. That's crazy. I thought the guy who prayed over you in Los Angeles was crazy, but that's a different thing. So
there's a lot of anecdotes, endless.
But that's interesting also to kind of talk about the kind of interrelationship between you and the dancers that you work with. And also, I mean, you know, it's worth in the kind of practical sense talking about how, you know, the work is not, I mean, when we say it's a 4.5-hour loop, it's not continuous one individual performing for this kind of physical expenditure to see if they can withstand 4.5 hours of pain and endurance. It's really a kind of really delicate cycle of
And the way that I deal with duration it has nothing to do with exhaustion. At least that's not what I'm about, and that's not what I'm interested in. It's more about being present and being there and trying to occupy the space as much as any other art forms occupy the space of the museum, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, I mean, to that end, again, kind of in terms of variables or issues that arose that we had not anticipated was the coldness of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course, you never
think, the marble.
Wow, why would you think about this? I mean, it would be like a 75, 80-degree day in February, super beautiful. Sorry, Minneapolis. And then, but then they'd have these kind of long periods of cold on the marble floor that would just kind of retain all of this cold, you know, temperature.
Yeah.
And then having to, I mean, the piece didn't have to adapt because of that. I mean, but you had to
wear layers.
Yeah, but it was absurd. I mean, we would go out and try to find like thin thermals. I mean, you know, and then trying to figure out what socks, you know, and all of these decisions were just happening kind of in the moment to make sure that it wasn't this thing that was like killing people, you know, or making them sick.
And nobody got sick.
Yeah. So ethically, it's very, you know, charged in that way. Is it maybe then worth talking about how, I mean, the piece changed in terms of thinking about it at the Hammer to then how you had to kind of think about restaging it at the Stedelijk? And I have some images. So when was it there again?
In April. So Hammer was in February, and then April was at Stedelijk. And at Stedelijk, all the spaces in the way that I chose, I was not able to do because they had the big Matisse show. So again, we're mobile, so we can move around. And the only place we could do the work was in the entrance. And in the entrance, of course, is the place that people come to the museum, get their tickets, and you're not yet in the museum space in your mind. Yeah, you have not relaxed, you have not entered this observant state or wanting to be inspired or all of that. You just don't care at all anyway. Something that was amazing at the Stedelijk, placing us, deciding and, agreeing to do it in the entrance, and is that people really kicked us all over the place and talked bad about us, and you can hear everything. But what made it beautiful was once the visitors enter the museum, and then let's say 3 hours or 2 hours later they would exit and we were still there, they end up spending even longer time with us. There was something about them, I guess, entering the space of the museum and opening up to art, to being quiet and watching, looking at art, that it gave them more space to do the same with us. And the fact that we were still there, it made them realize, okay, this is also part of the museum, this is also art or something like that. And it was really beautiful to see the same people that kicked you in the beginning and talked bad about us, spending time with us, and then telling us thank you and all of these things.
And how do you anticipate, I mean, as you're kind of now thinking about the piece, as it'll be presented at MoMA in February of next year, 2016, I mean, how are you kind of thinking about the work in relationship to some of these issues? Because of course, when you think about MoMA, you think about the crowds as well.
Yeah, I think that with the team that I'm working with, Thomas is here. Hi. We are really trying to take care of things in advance as much as we can. There's going to be a lot of surprises, of course. But right away, knowing that MoMA is the busiest one of all, let's say, we are bringing in more dancers. So we become more visible in a way in the space. Because I think just staying the four of us in these liminal spaces will completely disappear. And then I think I don't want to talk too much about MoMA because it's coming up. Yeah, you should come and see it at MoMA.
Sounds good.
February 21st to
March 20th.
Right. Okay. So, and just kind of going back a little bit, thinking about something that Fionn said about the kind of accelerated nature of things, and I already had this idea about, okay, making this kind of leap and thinking about your interest in slowness, and then the kind of like certain kinds of metaphors that get applied to that, like, Raimunda's using these kind of like geological, tectonic metaphors, and then thinking about the glacial pace of museums, it's like things just move so slowly sometimes, like you're planning an exhibition for 2019. It's just like ages away, And then, but in some ways, how performance programming, and so this is a question that relates, to the context of this conference, obviously. But, there are different levels of different ideas of speed, things that can happen in an immediate sense, things that can happen quicker, and then things that actually kind of like take longer time to produce. And I wonder, how you're now kind of thinking about upcoming works, and this is much about the process of making a new work, and having to kind of think about the long lead time because there's so much presentation that happens between now and a given commission or something. How you kind of imagine that and how you adapt to the kind of like the long arc of time when you're approached by some of these spaces that kind of don't move at such an accelerated pace, perhaps. And then how that makes sense in relationship to this. And then the second question, which I'll probably reiterate, is like how even like slowness is somehow compatible with, the logic of a museum type space that you're working in, or the kind of the logic of exhibition time.
I was never interested in slowness. It's funny to say because my work is very slow. But it was, this whole approach to physicality came because of my interest with images. And a way to see images, I kind of started working with stillness. And then to transfer from one position to the next, one image to the next, then I brought in the slow way of transferring the weight from one to the next so it doesn't shake things. So it doesn't look like MTV here, we're holding it. And then we move fast to the next thing. Yeah, just to, in a way, to soothe the one image going from one to the next. Now, about things take a long time, and it's not only the making of the work, but really the whole production of the work. I cannot really start a new piece unless I know there's money. So I can, before even casting people, I know I can tell them, you're going to get paid $1, you're going to get paid $100, whatever, 100,000. I need to make a clear proposal, things have to be in place. And it's not just the romantic of me being in the studio and making the work. Yeah? And all of that takes a long time to realize. And bring people to collaborate and apply for grants and scheduling, finding people that are available to work when your deadlines are on. So I would say that it takes almost like 2 years
Mm-hmm.
to make all of this happen.
Right.
And in the meantime, you can be working on another piece at the same time that you started 2 years before.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think just to reiterate the kind of the
I don't know if
difference.
that was your question.
No, it helps. It's great. The just to kind of reiterate this idea of the kind of co-commissioning model that becomes so important. I mean, I think for the Hammer, I mean, there was no way that we could have done this without MoMA and without the Stedelijk kind of, and you know, really initiating these conversations kind of among the various curators to kind of make sure that the piece could kind of have these 3 iterations, and then, you know, really thinking about that as an important way of even addressing this type of work, you know, from a practical sense.
I almost can't even start visualizing the work. Like the 2 things that are important for me is to find out which space I'm using and what money I have. And then I know if it's going to be a solo or it's going to be, I can do 10 people, you know?
Right.
Space is very, very important. Also because space will define, okay, if I'm doing it in the theater, then I'm going to play with the audience in a very different way. The attention of the audience in the theater is very, very different from a space like in a museum space. I don't want to go in a museum and ask you to, let's say, view the work as if you're in a theater, but now instead of a black box, it's a white cube. You know, like I was very interested from the start to keep the rules of the museum, let's say. You know, a visitor spends 2 seconds in front of a painting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they might completely dismiss that painting and stop and spend a long time in another. They continue talking on the phone. They chat with their friends. In a theater space, this doesn't happen. Even if you kind of like close your eyes, you're there, you don't speak to your friend next to you, you don't answer the phone.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think those types of, that set of relationships that you're just describing is also what kind of really interested me in pursuing a project with you, is that, you know, there was the potential to kind of play with these, the aimlessness of certain kind of modes of viewing, you know, within these, the kind of context of the Hammer, and how even, you know, there are certain expectations, I think, that an audience has when they kind of step into a museum. Everything is presented for them. The lights are turned on for them. The doors open for them. And I really liked the way in which, like, conceiving of this piece was that it wasn't really for them. And
it was.
I mean, it was, but there was a certain kind of, I don't know, like, indifference, I think, at play, because while it was obviously being kind of presented according to opening hours, you know, the assumption is that it's performance that you kind of happen upon, rather than you kind of buy the ticket and sit, and it turns itself on for you.
And it's really important for me that my work doesn't ask for your attention. You know, if you want to spend time with us, we're there, and we're giving it all. But I'm not going to go like this to you to get your attention, you know. And I do that in the theater too, which it can be quite boring for an audience.
Right.
You know, because I think we're used to pulling the attention
Right.
towards the spectacle or in our everyday life, really.
Speaking of which, should we maybe ask these people if they any questions? Maybe there first. Yeah. Sure, you with the blue.
She's waiting for it.
Yeah. Oh, a microphone. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Xander Eden from Diverse Works in Houston. And I've actually experienced your work in 2 very different ways. One of them was a project by a really wonderful Canadian artist named Scott Lyle, who you invited to come to rehearsals while you were working on Gloria in, I think that was 2007?
Yeah.
And I had invited him to be in an exhibition about memory, or actually about forgetting at the same time. And he was like, well, I'm working with this dancer, you know, and I don't know anything about dance, but she seems really interesting. And he was really excited about it. He's one of my favorite artists. I've I've written about his work and been really supportive. So
He's one of my favorite artists.
yeah, he's really awesome. So what happened was I never got to see Gloria, but he installed all of the objects and work and digital work that he had created in response to his experience with you as an installation. So the installation became kind of a memory of the piece, except everything, like you weren't there and the piece wasn't there, but there was sort of like this, almost like a memoriam to what had happened. It was really beautiful, really interesting work. And I was interested in what you felt about that, like the, working with a visual artist and then the kind of split between the piece and then the memory of the piece and the objects that remained. And then the other experience I had with your work was live in New York with the solo show during Performa, which was, I think, about an hour long on a stage. And I can tell you, me and the rest of the audience were completely mesmerized for that entire hour of you moving across the stage. It was a really intense experience. So they're sort of the complete opposites of, this kind of object installation, visual representation, and then a more conventional theatrical experience. And so you seem to now be in the middle of those two things. Anyway, so I was wondering about the objects and then also if you're still collaborating with visual artists from time to time.
I started collaborating with Scott, in particular, in 2007, after seeing an installation that he did at Miguel Abro in New York. And that first collaboration that we did, I asked him to make the set for the work. And then he had mentioned to me that he was doing, and I've seen something because he did something at Sculpture Center, I think that he did one video that is, he said to me, is based on your work, but then it was just lines. And because I trust him, he can do whatever he wants, no problem. After that collaboration, though, I was not interested anymore in working with a visual artist or anybody else in making my sets, because they're so embedded in the ideas of the work that I create. So they come right away once I define my space, how the lights are going to be and all of that. They're such a big part of the work. But I wanted to continue working with Scott, so I invited him to be a dramaturg. He's not a dramaturg. But yeah, and we continued. We've been working together since then on every project. And now he's a dramaturg.
Yeah, sure.
I can probably do it without a mic. I'm Claire. I'm at the MCA in Chicago. I have really practical questions because I think this kind of work really challenges big institutions to be responsive to the artist's needs on an hour-by-hour basis. So I'm wondering what you guys did ahead of time to set expectations and manage each other and manage your staff and manage your audience, contracts, special interns who were going to take care of the artists, an extra budget for socks, and I want to know, what are the practical things you did to make sure that Maria didn't get frustrated with the institution and walk out, or that the institution didn't get overwhelmed by the work?
We could have done more. Anyone could have done. You can always do more. I think that it's a really good question because it is, in some ways, I have to say that even from my experience of working within the Hammer, it was very, very early. I think it was within my first year. So in certain ways, there was a whole set of issues about communication that I was even adapting to because I had worked only with smaller institutions before where you just tell somebody who's sitting right next to you, and then there's a whole network of communication network. So, I do think it was just, it's interesting. We had, I think it was within the first day, for instance, of realizing this question about proximity that people would kind of take liberties with getting too close to the performers, or there's one occasion this photographer who spent maybe over an hour, getting very intimate. And
I got up and I said to him to stop, like I couldn't take it anymore.
Right.
Because it felt like he was developing his own art form from what we're doing, and great, but then give us money. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no problem with snapshots, iPhones, all of that. No problem at all. But it was like a professional camera, lenses, all of that, and it was just too much.
Right. I mean, I think in some senses, what the benefit of the hammer was in the case was that we kind of, rather than working with security guards per se, we work with their visitor experience representatives, which seems to be like a kind of new model or something. And so there, there's a certain level of sensitivities at play there, and they set up a very direct line of communication about anything that happened. But I mean, like I said, there were issues that were that we just admittedly hadn't thought about, and a lot of it came about because of the fact that the museum was undergoing a kind of installation, and to even say that the Hammer is a big institution is a bit of an overstatement, because it's really, I mean, when you're there and you're seeing a show installed, it seems like it's a very small place, actually.
I think we learned a lot from this experience.
Yeah.
Both of us, all of us.
Yeah, so you're welcome, Thomas, because by the time this is at MoMA.
But for sure.
Yeah.
We didn't think about socks. It happened. And they were amazing they went out to find, I remember even the director of the museum, she was like, oh my God, they're too cold. We have to do something about it. They were all amazing, but we didn't think about these things. We didn't think about a lot of things.
And it's also the condition of the space too, where, the Hammer is, we're in such close proximity to this piece. And our offices are very close to the galleries. And so in a way, it was like, I saw Maria every day. And there were people who just kind of set up these personal relationships with her. So it happened in a kind of more of an organic way, I think. But I do think that there could have been many more kind of, set things that would have helped to kind of foresee some of these issues. But it's just, for us, it was lucky because there is just this kind of inherent, proximity that we're able to take advantage of.
But from your side, Maria, how do you know that an institution is ready to take care of you?
Oh, I didn't know.
You don't know.
I didn't know. Now I know. With Thomas, with MoMA, it's amazing what's happening there. But at the Hammer was the first time that we were gonna do a whole month. I was really lucky to also work with amazing collaborators, because the performers are all older, and they can take care of themselves, and they were very excited about this proposal too. But we all were trying this for the first time. None of us had performed 9 hours a day for a month every day. We didn't know what we were gonna face. What happens if you really have to go to the bathroom? We didn't, and we learned every day. And we kept on talking to Aram, text messages, because also we have half an hour breaks, but we're invisible those half an hours. So we would text each other, we need this, we need that, no. And we stayed very open within a very alive dialogue to keep figuring things out.
Yeah. Yeah, the accessibility, I think, is really important. It's usually you open up an exhibition and you can kind of like walk away from it. You take the trip, because the show is open. But in this, they're required like a certain level of presence.
Full-time job for you guys as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah? Hi, it's Kristy Edmonds. Hey, Maria. Hey, Aram. It's interesting being in proximity to this at the Center for the Art of Performance at UCLA, because while poised to help in collaboration on it, I'd say it was, connection light. But Aram had in advance contacted us, and Maria, we saw each other and that kind of thing. But what's interesting, and I want to just flip it a little bit to the audience, because it was a very interesting experience. The Center's been involved in trying to develop deepened kinds of literacies around abstraction in dance and choreography. And so this was a project that I wanted to make sure that audiences were able to see. So there were a couple of things. One, that when people would be call 911, on the audience side that would have been connected in some way to the Center, that was a huge, we were even experiencing it, gesture of empathy, a real exquisite attention to care for a total stranger, right? Mm-hmm. But it was also and so I brought some of our members and patrons in kind of the dance council area to see and experience the work. And what was interesting on my end was that different to the museum-going like viewer were dance viewing audience. Mm-hmm. And that kind of collision of practice, or in some cases people wanting to impose a narrative on a physical gesture, like what does this mean, what is it a comment on, what is the symbolism, versus a kind of general viewer going by, again, that sort of 2-second glimpse mm-hmm. of a painting, of a you. But the audience that was coming to try and experience it, there were just little subtle kind of shifts. But they would often, when I was there, because I probably was over there about 12 times, they would linger. They would experience time duration. They would find a comfortable place to view with a kind of, how do we give you and your dancers exquisite attention, mm-hmm. right? And when they would experience this other audience that was not doing that, they were concerned, like, how can we help them see? What is our responsibility, right? The other thing just was when we were trying to help advocate the experience to a broader public from the center's vantage point, which was great, and the Hammer, which we do a lot of different things with, were totally receptive. But it was interesting to watch the public not understand when the performance would happen, like what time of day. So just publishing, concurrent to all exhibition, opening hours of the Hammer Museum, the kind of agitation that the audience would be unable to get there to see the show mm-hmm. was an interesting kind of dynamic as well. Yeah. But it was a very beautiful insertion of a conversation across multiple ways of experiencing the cellular body in time and space.
Thank you, Kristy.
Yeah.
And also, Kristy gave us space to rehearse and totally arranged for me to work with 6 of the UCLA dancers, and thank you so much.
I'm Nora Hall, and I'm here at the Walker, co-chair of Philip's Producer Council. I would love to hear more about the assumption, I think, of value of activating the interstitial, liminal, and marginal spaces. I'm just curious what your reasons are for that being part of your process. And I feel like I have a little bit of an understanding of it from the point of view of print art and the role of marginalia and annotation, how that draws the interest of the reader, I think, when you're coming back to a text. But I don't know if that's an interesting parallel or not, and what your thoughts are based on your experience.
I like this idea of, especially for the 3 museums for this work, because it was different in Venice. The spaces that we're using people have to revisit, because they enter the museum, they have to go through there. To exit the museum, they have to go through there. So they're gonna get to see us twice. So you also play with how you change as a visitor after you've been in the museum space. But also this idea of things that you don't consider as art, let's say, can we reconsider them? You're not supposed to see art, a sculpture on the staircases or by the bathroom, or I don't know.
Or the bookshop.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Judy Hussey-Taylor from Dance Space Project. I have a question for both of you, and it has to do with sort of a romance around dancers and performers and anonymity. and not
Anonymity.
being anonymous.
Yeah.
And it's something that I think about a lot, and it concerns me, and I'm very involved in these kind of crossover projects over many years. But I wonder how you think about that in relationship to these exhibitions, performances in museum spaces, and then and how you want it to deal with that. And then it also brings up a larger concern for me around the history of choreography and dance and getting lost in and not being named and not being visible but invisible simultaneously.
It's a little bit tricky because people get to know the name of the author, let's say my name, but the other performers, they don't know it's me, yeah, when I'm performing, of course, they just know this name. But the other performers almost don't have a name, so I think it's really important to place somewhere within the museum, you know, the names of the collaborators, maybe repeat it somewhere else. But there's something about being dancers, performers, however you want to call it, that I think we do it beyond people will know who I am and I look like this, you know. We enjoy doing this. These people in my work really they are the work, because you have so much time to look at them, each one of them. And the way that they appropriate, let's say, the movement in their body and the decisions they have to take each moment that they're performing with the audience, how close they come, all of that. They're super responsible. They're, you know.
I think I want to dig into this a little bit more, because I think a point of pride for performing arts presenters and curators who take a great care with the work is a long tradition, and it's such a convention, right? It's a program, and they're named, and I think it's something we value, and I really want to bring that to the fore, because I think it's so important, this work, and it's so important to not, you know, what is that dynamic between what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
We're not collecting, but we are marking, naming, archiving, which will come up later today. And I don't have an answer, because I think I just really want to bring out that kind of I think tension about what we're valuing and who.
I hope we're valuing people, but
Let's go here, the gentleman, and then Thomas next. The beard.
I'm afraid I was one of those people. I stumbled onto the Hammer performance accidentally, yes, and I was one of those assholes with a camera. However, it was for a short period of time.
we didn't mind short period of time.
Okay, but I was really curious to hear you say that there was an anger towards the reactions you were getting from people, because it's a very, very provocative takeover of the space. I mean, you have to get upstairs. You have to. I suppose there's an elevator, but basically you climb the stairs, and you were blocking the stairs. So you have this great provocation, and I'm wondering whether, apart from obviously you have your human reactions, but is there any element that you see you could bring to the work to, I mean, obviously you choreograph it in advance, but to have some sort of, you spoke about the empathy that the audience, quotes, was having, that you could somehow work with that dynamic in a live context and not have it sort of become sort of an us and them thing, but more of a we?
I mean, I try. And most of the times I think we stay pretty calm. It's just, and we're not trying to block the staircases, because it's just, if you take a second before you go up the staircase, you can see a map right away. Okay, this person is taking this part. So, but the other side of the staircases, if one is completely occupied, the other one we do have. It's very calculated, yeah. So we never really block in the staircase. We're making maybe a little bit slower for you. You cannot just run up and down. You have to take care of yourself because you're taking care of somebody else that is there at the same time. But in reality, you should take care of yourself going down and up the stairs every day of your life. But there are things that make you angry, you know, because we hear everything that people say. And when, you know, there was this woman asking her boyfriend to take pictures, and Oishin was upside down on the staircases, and she was like posing like, you know, it was horrible. And I'm the author of the work, I can see this. And I was trying to make a signal to the guards to ask them to stop, because I feel bad for Oishin doing that. I don't want my work to be represented like that. I don't think we should be doing that as visitors in the museum anyway. You don't go in front of a Matisse and do these things, you know. I'm not comparing myself to Matisse, but there's a respect to what's exhibited in a museum that we can require the same.
And then Thomas, and then we'll cut it out. Is that okay?
Maria, you were describing the kind of imagistic quality of the work, the way that they're kind of photographic or pictures that appear. And as we look at this image of this body, it's incredibly evocative, this kind of falling body that we see here. I think being in New York, I think immediately of the Sarah Charlesworth film still series that were made before September 11th and then after September 11th. Now whenever I look at those images, I think of those falling bodies. Rather than thinking about this in terms of 9/11, I'm just wondering about the way in which that work is at once a kind of container, an open container for a lot of different forms of representation, but then incredibly specific at the same time. How are the bodies that we see here representative at all of different kinds of falling bodies, even if they do so in ways that are kind of incommensurable or impossible to kind of cohere or speak about in any stable way? And I guess this is a question for both of you guys.
I like this, how do you call it? Not antithesis, but the paradox of this strong body and at the same time it's a weak body. It's falling, but you know we're not going to fall, because everything is choreographed. We have muscles and strength to sustain ourselves. But there's this half and half in everything that we do. You know, we can fall apart, but we don't. It's not answering your question, really, no.
All right. Well, with that, thank you very much.